How about these reports that the U.S. is looking at restricting some AI chips out of NVIDIA and AMD to certain countries?
I have a thesis on this, all right? So they're thinking about restricting the ones to the Gulf. They sell almost none, but if you can get out of selling it to the Gulf at a low price and you put those things out in the market right now, NVIDIA is actually going to profit from this. It's actually going to profit because the demand for their stuff is insane. And again, when you're listening to Adobe and you're listening to Shantanu Narayan, you know that you can't get this stuff done unless you have NVIDIA.
What was your take on what Sanjay told you last night?
All right, well, Sanjay's basically, he does a lot of high bandwidth, which is memory, which is data center, but he's doing a lot of NAND, which is good. He's talking about a 2025 move that makes you really want to get invested in PCs, AI PC. He's also spending a fortune, and he's going to own. He's going to open a place in New York. He's got other plants around the country, but around the world. But I just think his business is booming. It is just booming, and I think that people bought it up 19%. It wasn't enough. This stock deserves to be higher, and like it's down 54 cents. So like, did that guy watch? What was he watching? Donald Duck? I mean, Scrooge McDuck? That was a. Sanjay was the most bullish I've ever heard of. I've known Sanjay for many, many years. He's the most bullish I've ever heard of.
Meantime, we do have some activity in tech. NASDAQ was down about 1% a moment ago. Shares of ASML dropping sharply on their guidance. And for that, we'll turn to Seema Modi. Hey, Seema.
Carl, this is the Dutch microchip equipment maker reporting earnings that came in better than expected, but its guide for 2025 is weaker than what Wall Street had anticipated. It expects 2025 total net sales to be between 30 to 35 billion euros. The Street was expecting around 35.8 billion. And we have comments here from their CEO. While there continues to be a strong development and upside potential in AI, other market segments, he says, are taking longer to recover. It now appears the recovery is more gradual than previously expected. ASML is a key supplier to NVIDIA, Taiwan Semi. It makes a very specific microchip that many other companies cannot make. So this will be an interesting read here across the entire semiconductor sector as we watch names like NVIDIA trade in record high territory. Guys?
Yeah, although not right now, Seema. NVIDIA down 4%, AMD as well. Do you believe it is on this related to this news?
It may be. Expectations have been very high, David, going into earnings season. ASML today, and then we have Taiwan Semi, which reports in about 24 hours. And given the whole story around demand, those comments from Jensen Huang about insane demand for Blackwell, again, expectations have been high.
Yeah. Well, again, NVIDIA and AMD both down. Of course, ASML a lot more than that. Seema, thank you. Seema Modi. Would point out as well, you know, when we came into the session this morning, NVIDIA was creeping up in market cap towards Apple's 3.5 trillion, but that disparity has actually grown given NVIDIA's 4% loss. Apple shares up some 2%, perhaps on some data from IDC we got this morning as well. You can take a look at NVIDIA, but Apple shares benefiting from a nice move higher.
Again, I've been sort of talking about this for a bit now, really since, June, July, which is I think NVIDIA is going to be strong through this year. But when you get into the first half of next year, my belief is unless you see Microsoft or Amazon or Google or some killer app that everybody needs to have show up that generates a ton of revenues, as well as the profit picture is starting to improve, I think you're going to get into the first 6 months of next year and you're going to go through an AI digestion phase. Now, by the way, for the next 6 quarters, consensus is that NVIDIA revenues grow 7 to 11%. But for the next 3 months, 6 months, do I think things are probably fine there? Absolutely. But, I think you've seen the front of this AI trade with Microsoft, Google, and Amazon being already weak when they reported back their June quarters. Now you've seen the end of that, which is ASML on the other side, missed by 50% on the order books. And so I think that's what people need to keep in mind, because I'm sure as we go through this earnings season, NVIDIA is going to have another beat and raise quarter because they haven't been able to deliver the Blackwell chips that they wanted. So people are going to say, see, I told you the AI trade is fine. But don't forget, we already went through this with COVID, where NVIDIA's revenues were down over 20% year over year after all of these same customers digested their COVID spend. Then this thing called, generative AI came along, and revenues went from down over 20% to up 84% at the beginning of 2021. And so I think, sorry, getting the time frames confused, but it went up to over 80% during COVID, from down 20 before COVID. And I think you're going to see a same kind of digestion period as we get through to the other side of this.
All right, Dan, I'm sorry, I was going to say real quick for lay people, what is a warning sign when NVIDIA reports, if there's any? I would imagine it would come in the form of margins, potentially a deterioration in margins. What would you look for? NVIDIA is going to be the last person to see this. And so for me, I try to look out to the front of the food chain. So I'm going to be you're going to see NVIDIA react when Google, Amazon, and Microsoft report. Microsoft in particular to me is very interesting because if you remember last quarter, they missed their Azure numbers. And by the way, that's where OpenAI feeds through the model for Microsoft. And so if there's another problem there, people are not going to like it. Amazon's the other one because they are the biggest of the hyperscalers. And so I'm going to be watching very closely what AWS has to say, because that's going to be the leading indicator of a problem. NVIDIA, much like after that digestion following the COVID buildup, they didn't see it, and people forget. They pre-announced negatively when they were digesting all that COVID buildup. That's, they're not going to see it because their customers on, the front of this, they just want to get as many chips as they can right now, given the Blackwell chips were already delayed.
Dan, always great to get your take. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Dan Niles. So if you think NVIDIA hits the skids or has some sort of trouble in the first half of next year, how do you trade it now?
I don't think you need to chase it. I think a lot of investors that I talk to want to own NVIDIA. They want it in their portfolio. And those that are thinking in the traditional allocation approach are not thinking I have to have it all today. Having said that, I need to start buying it if I don't have it now. So pullbacks are nice, but ultimately, NVIDIA is going to continue to be the dominant or a dominant part of the tech trade. But what Dan's talking about, I think, is really what it comes down to. The CapEx spend that we're going to see out of hyperscalers is what this earnings period is all about. And the irony is, of course, that those stocks may go higher as they talk about less CapEx and less spend on AI. And those are some of the names, frankly, that have reasserted themselves. I mean, look at the move in Meta. If they tell you it's the year of efficiency in AI spend, they've got all this other good news and things that are going for them. And one of the few that is pointing to AI revenue base. And I think it'll go a lot higher.
All right.
Third, while the big boys do indeed have a clue, we clearly have a lot of investors, or maybe traders, or maybe jokers, who don't know a Frito-Lay chip from a semiconductor chip. How else do you explain what happened to the stock of NVIDIA today, which makes the kind of AI chips where ASML says there's no weakness? The stock plunged 4.5%, one of the worst performers of the day, as part of a broader semiconductor sell-off. Even though ASML was explicit that companies like NVIDIA are doing fine, it didn't matter. Now, tomorrow, Jeff Marks and I are convening our monthly CNBC Investing Club meeting, and I was trying to figure out a scenario where some of our favorite stocks would come down, so we might be able to recommend them at better prices at noon. I didn't think that the price break would come from a semiconductor equipment maker like ASML, which saw a hideous 53% decline in orders quarter over quarter. Truly shocking. Even if AI chips are doing well, they can't offset the weakness in the rest of the industry. But this gives me a chance to explain that the semiconductor stocks are really only as good as their end markets. Last night, for example, Micron Sanjay Mehrotra came on the show telling us that everything in the data center was on fire and that he sold out of the high bandwidth memory chips needed for AI. He also predicted a big PC refresh cycle aided by the introduction of AI-enabled personal computers, which I think will be used for the holiday season right into 2025. So, I think it's going to be so huge that I keep endorsing the stock of Best Buy, even up here. They've got a giant allocation of these machines. Some 40% of all AI-oriented PCs from Microsoft will go through Best Buy. AMD has exposure both to the PC and AI, which is why we used the weakness to buy some shares for the Charitable Trust today. It was painful to do so.
The House of Pain.
But we want to build a position into weakness, not strength. We want to get a better basis. That's how you do it as a professional. Now, we know from some recent surveys that many different telco companies are doing better, but they aren't by any means smoking hot. The Internet of Things and autos, they're just okay. Maybe they get better with lower interest rates, but I think there are better things to invest in. I certainly didn't want to take advantage of the sell-off caused by ASML to pounce on the other semiconductor capital equipment makers like Lam Research, very good company, Applied Materials, another company I like, or KLA. They're all good, but they trade together. And if ASML is having such serious problems, you probably don't want to get involved in the part of the food chain that involves these companies, because they're going to go lower. But to go back to NVIDIA for a second, this is a company with a plethora of opportunities, and it dominates all of them. NVIDIA doesn't mess around with the semiconductor capital equipment makers. Its chips are made by Taiwan Semiconductor. We haven't really thought much about the equipment going into it. The Taiwan Semi reports later this week. Perhaps they can straighten us out on what's working and what isn't. Still, today serves as a really serious reminder that even the most bulletproof of semis can be brought down by others in its cohort, especially if it's in an ETF. If you can't tell a microchip from a potato chip, you probably would have sold the stock of NVIDIA today the way so many did at 210, 205, 200. But if you've done your homework, you know that not all chips are created equal, and you're now getting an incredible buying opportunity once again in the AI-related semiconductor stocks.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today and staying calm in this market. The S&P finished the day down nearly 0.8%, and NVIDIA finished the day down nearly 4.7%. This comes following two news events today. The first and lesser of the two news events is that the U.S. is considering export controls on NVIDIA chips to countries in the Persian Gulf. I'll be completely honest, I don't think this is a big deal for NVIDIA in the grand scheme of things. And then there is this second piece of news, which is what really pulled NVIDIA lower today. So ASML was scheduled to report earnings tomorrow, and today they accidentally posted their earnings on part of their website. I was not able to see the actual earnings myself, but according to TrendSpider, Q3 bookings came in at less than half of consensus estimates, which is not good at all. And forward-looking guidance for 2025 came in softer than expected as well, which is also not good. This news caused semiconductors as a whole, including NVIDIA, to trade lower today. I'm going to talk about my long-term view on NVIDIA in just a moment, but first I want to mention something important about the short term. I've been saying for a while now that I am cautious about adding to any positions in this market until we get to November 1st. This is because of the pattern the market followed back in 2016 and 2020. Back then, the market began trading lower in mid to late October, reaching a relative low on the Friday before the election. This year, that would be November 1st. And notice that back in 2020, the market actually traded higher in the first half of October before trading lower in the second half of the month. With this in mind, let's take a quick look at the SPY's chart on the daily time frame. Because today, the SPY tested this upper trend line and got rejected. Why do I bring this up? Well, I wonder if the situation with ASML today could be the spark that ignites a market pullback in the second half of this month. I don't know what will happen between now and November 1st. And yes, it is possible for the market to trade higher in the second half of this month, but that would be an anomaly. It would be a deviation from the norm. It is possible for the market to trade higher in the second half of October, but it would definitely be unusual for that to happen right before a major election. So, given the pattern the market followed back in 2016 and 2020, and given the rejection of the SPY today at the upper trend line on the daily time frame, I am cautious about adding to positions in this market until we get to November 1st. Again, I don't know what will happen between now and November 1st, but I personally would rather be patient just in case. Now, once we get to the actual week of the election, I think the market is likely to start trading higher as it did back in 2016 and 2020. And this is assuming that nothing unexpected is happening in the world at that time. And I also think it's possible for NVIDIA to start trading higher in November in anticipation of the company's next earnings report. This is because Micron reported great earnings recently, and also because we have confirmation from multiple NVIDIA customers, including OpenAI and Microsoft, that they're already receiving shipments of Blackwell. At NVIDIA's last earnings conference call, we were told that Blackwell would begin shipping in Q4. And here we are still in NVIDIA's fiscal third quarter, and we have confirmation from multiple NVIDIA customers that they're already starting to receive Blackwell. This means that we are likely to see some revenue from Blackwell show up in NVIDIA's next earnings report. And this also means that NVIDIA may be further along in the production ramp of Blackwell than what we were expecting. If this is the case, then we could see NVIDIA raise their Q4 guidance for Blackwell revenue. We're currently expecting $3 to $4 billion of Blackwell revenue in Q4. So if NVIDIA guides Q4 Blackwell revenue noticeably higher than $3 to $4 billion, then I think the stock likely trades higher on that news. Now I want to address something very important about NVIDIA. NVIDIA's competitive moat is massive, and they do not have to worry about competition for a long time. I encourage you to listen to what Jensen Huang said in Sunday's episode of the BG Squared podcast, because he explained NVIDIA's competitive advantage with such clarity. I have never been so bullish on the future of NVIDIA as I am now after having listened to Jensen speak on that podcast this past Sunday. I'm paraphrasing here, but in that podcast, Jensen essentially said, look, if another company develops a chip with more flops than NVIDIA's, that's great, but it doesn't really matter because the chip is only one single component of a massive flywheel across the entire stack. NVIDIA develops across the entire stack. It's not just hardware anymore. Now we're talking about software, networking, industry-specific algorithms, program libraries, etc. NVIDIA is so far ahead on all of these fronts that they don't have to worry about competition for a very long time. Everyone is so highly fixated on building faster chips right now to compete with NVIDIA that they're completely ignoring the fact that NVIDIA is speeding up the entire system, not just the chip. And so even if a chip with more flops is released by a competitor of NVIDIA's, it really doesn't matter to NVIDIA because they're so far ahead on all of these other components that make the system run more efficiently. It's not just about the chip anymore. The competitive moat that NVIDIA has right now is massive, and I do not expect that competitive moat to be breached by a competitor anytime soon. NVIDIA is so extremely far ahead of their competition, considering NVIDIA's competitive mode, considering the insane demand for their products, considering the fact that they are not just selling chips, but they are now selling entire platforms, considering that they are now releasing a new generation of product every year, and considering that we have a very clear product roadmap from NVIDIA to look forward to over the next couple of years. I am very bullish on the future of NVIDIA, and I seriously would not be surprised if this company doubles over the next 2 years, given NVIDIA's current growth trajectory and upcoming product cycles. Everyone is so caught up in trying to find the next NVIDIA, and I think it's only a matter of time before they wake up and realize that there's not another NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the clear winner when it comes to AI chips, and they likely will remain the clear winner for many years to come. And so, as long as things remain peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their capex spending on AI, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. At least that's how I view the situation. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.